Hi everyone, you guys are watching Black Tea News. I'm your host Christina Barr, and today we're going to be talking about this wild CNN video that's talking about critical race theory. So they're trying to gaslight people and say, hey, we're not teaching it in schools, and everyone, you're freaking out over nothing. And so they did this video to state why everyone's fears is just crazy. And so I'm going to react to it. Here we go, watching this crazy CNN video about critical race theory, and we'll see how bad it gets.
The president of the second largest teachers union is vowing to defend educators who get in trouble for teaching, quote, honest history. In a speech Tuesday, Randy Weingarten, president of the American Federation of Teachers, addressed the controversy surrounding critical race theory, which examines U.S. history through the lens of systemic racism. Republican politicians have been framing this theory as a threat to American children, and legislators in more than 12 states have proposed bills to ban it. Weingarten says her union is prepared to stand up for any member who is punished for teaching lessons on race and racism.
So they're like, critical race theory is not happening. We're not teaching it, but we're going to stand up for people who want to teach an accurate portrayal of history by teaching everything is not necessarily everything, but things have happened because of systemic racism. Okay, that's a weird flex you got going on there. By the way, Brianna, who's on CNN, I'm not particularly fond of her. I've talked about this like on live videos that I've done, critiquing her about a video where she went after a black legislator because the black caucus didn't want him, and she's like, well, I think it's because of Trump. And he's like, well, they can speak for themselves. Like, well, I think it's because of Trump. And so I just thought it was so disrespectful that these people want to pretend like they care about black issues, but at the end of the day, if people don't think the way that you're supposed to think, then they have to reduce you down to some other opinion of another white person. So what matters is not what the Black Caucus says and airs out with him. What matters is what she thinks on the issue, and it doesn't matter if that this man is his own individual. What matters is that he's associated with Trump. So it's his own sort of form of white supremacy, I guess you could say. It's amazing that these people don't realize that they're the baddies. But I just wanted to point that out, and we're going to keep going.
CNN's Ellie Reeves spoke with a teacher who uses critical race theory and looked at how backlash to this framework has exploded. So, Ellie, do these vocal opponents of critical race theory actually understand fully what it is?
No. And why should they? It's an academic theory mostly taught at the grad student level. But what they think it means is teaching white kids that all white people are bad and racist. And so, of course, they're afraid of that.
She sounds so sincere, right, about their fears. Of course, it's a bad thing. Okay.
There are thousands of parents all over the U.S. of all races who have been speaking out against CRT, and rightfully so. These are my babies, not yours. If you are embarrassed or ashamed of your skin color, that's your issue, not mine nor my children.
This is a school board meeting in a suburb of Philadelphia, where a small group of very vocal parents are speaking out against critical race theory, or CRT.
We do not want our children to be taught that America is systemically racist.
600,000 people died in the Civil War to end racism and slavery. Don't rewrite factual history or indoctrinate, just present the facts.
These parents are saying, we don't want you to teach about systemic racism. We don't want that to be the lens that you're teaching their kids, that this is, that all, matters, our systems are rooted in racism. They don't want that taught. If you want to teach history, you can talk about what happened. You can talk about dates and times, and you can speak accurately about things that happened. Obviously, slavery happened. We fought a civil war. There are white abolitionists as well as black ones. People came together to end this monstrosity, and then people tried to place blockages on black people, and those things had to be repealed, and we had to keep pushing for civil rights, but we pushed past it to get to where we are today. So you can teach what happened, the good, the bad, ugly. We don't want you to hide the facts. We just don't want you to teach that there's this particular racist worldview. Just keep it accurate and don't add the extra sauce that you want to put on there. So that's, you know, what I'm hearing from people, like they're displaying, that I'm hearing from people around. I've been taught history, and other people have been taught history. We've learned about slavery and bad things that have happened in America. You don't want to be indoctrinated with your worldview. So that's what people are saying, and CNN is saying that parents don't know what's going on. They don't understand critical race theory. So now they're going to explain to you what it is.
In the wake of protests of the murder of George Floyd, Republican politicians have been hyping critical race theory as a threat to the impressionable minds of America's children.
Okay, so this is garbage, right? Why would you even mention, after the wake of what happened to George Floyd, these Republicans are fighting back with critical race theory? Why mention George Floyd? Especially, like, we're aware of all the marches and everything that happened, but FYI, everyone was saying, this is like a perfect example, because everyone was saying that it was rooted in racism, right? That Chauvin was a racist, there was racism there, that this happens with the police, and that police are, there's some good police, but they're inherently racist and all this other kind of stuff, and they didn't bring real facts and numbers because it doesn't speak to that, but people are just so sure. They would say crazy things like, well, if George Floyd was white, he wouldn't be dead, even though there's examples like Tony Timpa and so on that are white, where they have died in the care of the police, suffocating and so on. So, but when the trial actually happened with George Floyd, do you know what did not play a factor in the conviction of, I'm not going to say that, what did not play a factor when they were convicting him, like as far as the case that the lawyers were making, that he was a racist. That was not part of the case, because there wasn't evidence for that. They couldn't try it. It wasn't there. It wasn't there. So they made America stop, and this was the great racism thing that happened. This was an example of racism that people have to face all the time, and that's why so many Black Americans have to be so afraid for their lives. But at the end of the day, you had no evidence to present in court about it. None. It was just narrative and nonsense that you captivated the whole entire country with. And not just the marches on the street, but even the shows that we watch on TV had like wild propaganda the entire time. During the pandemic, like so many people just repeated the same storyline after storyline. Some people did it better than others. The SWAT TV show had some powerful propaganda regarding like the police shootings and and how people's feelings and etc. Powerful propaganda, but propaganda nonetheless. So they mentioned George Floyd and set it up like, after George Floyd, these Republicans, and they got together and they decided we can't have critical race theory, because they're setting up like critical race theory would be complementary to the movement that they had. But the thing is that you have to know is that civil rights is about moving America forward. Critical race theory is about looking at every single institution and dismantling them. That's what it's about. So it's egregious that these people even bothered to make that comparison. But let's keep going.
Critical race theory says every white person is a racist. Critical race theory says America is fundamentally racist and irredeemably racist.
In 12 states, legislators have proposed bills to ban CRT.
As they should.
We wanted to meet the actual people working with actual kids in actual schools.
Okay, great.
So we talked to Keziah Ridgway, who teaches high school African American history and discusses CRT in her anthropology class.
Can I just start with a very simple?
It's not in schools, but I teach in my high school class. Okay.
Well, what is critical race theory?
Yes. Critical race theory is not being taught in schools. It is a
She teaches a 12th grade class about African American studies, issues, whatever. And she teaches critical race theory, references or whatever. They're they're like admitting in their own thing. How could someone edit this and think this was like, yeah, we're gonna get them when we put this out there? Yeah, we're gonna show those conservatives and those dumb parents. You've already failed, sir or ma'am. Let's keep going.
Theory. It is a lens by which to view history and the way that law and race kind of overlaps and connects in society. Can it influence the way that some teachers teach? Yeah, but that's a good thing, right?
Okay. So why, for the people who say that we should teach critical race theory? First of all, why should we be teaching a theory in the history classes, dates, times, numbers, things, events that happen, so on, okay? But now we're like justifying, this is a lens of a worldview that we have. And it can't, does it influence teachers? I kind of thought at first you'd be like, it can, but we're professionals. So we can objectively teach your kids. That's what like a professional person, I would think, would say, that we can be professional and put those, you know, our biases aside. She says, yes, it can influence teachers, and that's a good thing. It's a good thing that we have this, that I am now biased, that I am teaching through this lens of how to teach history, because it's a good thing that I'm looking at everything through this hyper racial lens, because we should, because Ted Cruz said that people are afraid because you're teaching people to hate America, that everyone's racist, that America's bad, all the systemic racism stuff, and they're acting like that's not what happened, but this person is just coming on and confirming everything that people are afraid of. Perhaps even after hearing this, why wouldn't you be more afraid? Because now you know for sure what it means, and now you know that it is bad. Now you know that it is bad.
Right? Because race and racism is literally the building blocks of this country.
So parents are saying they don't want their kids taught systemic racism. That's not what they want. But she's saying, no, they should be taught it because it is literally the building blocks of this nation. Really? Is that what the Declaration of Independence says? Is that why we even broke away from Britain? Because like if you read, you know, they lay out like a case of stuff. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. Like, that kind of seems like that's the big deal there. You know, if I recall correctly, because I did take history, American history, that the whole consent of the governed thing was really important. So just FYI, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive to these ends, it is a right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute a new government laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. And there's more, you can read it. But the point is that there's more to America than racism. And if you are so stuck on that being the thing, you're biased and you are trying to indoctrinate children into your worldview. Now, if that's your worldview and you think you can defend it, go for it. But what right do you have to indoctrinate someone else's child when they drop off their kid and they think that they're learning about dates, times, locations, events that happened? The audacity of some of these people.
So how can you not talk about it?
Critical race theory is an academic framework that says racial inequality is perpetuated by the racism embedded in America's laws, not by individual bigotry. But relentless propaganda from some conservatives has created a panic that white people, and especially white children, are under attack.
They are under attack. Everyone is under attack with this garbage because in the tenets of critical race theory, it makes it clear that you think racism is involved with everything. It's in the air we breathe. We're just swimming in an ocean of racism. Like, it's inescapable, and it's a part of our framework. You literally said it's a reason why we're forming this in like every institution of our life. And who built that? Are you blaming the black people for building a racist America, or are you just blaming it on their ancestors? So, and if you're saying who's racist and you believe everyone is racist and just everywhere, yet people rework the definition of racism and they don't believe black people can be racist because they have an institutional power structure. You have to have an institutional power structure and they don't believe like black people have it or possess it. Then how is it possible that anyone is racist other than white people? And then they don't even want you to see the world without color. So you don't want to get away from racism. You want racism to be the foundation of everything. So what was the end goal of all this? You have to ask yourself. Because it's not to make a less racist world. It's not something in your ideology that you can easily defeat. It's not to teach people that it doesn't matter in their lives, because you have to acknowledge it and fight it and tear down everything. Some really good institutions. You said it's literally in the framework of our nation and our laws and everything. Even though you could read on with the Declaration of Independence, but it doesn't say in the framework, we are racist. That's not what it says. That's not why we formed our nation. In the same, liberty and principles that didn't apply to everyone, it certainly does now. So what's the end game here? Because it seems that you just want more people to be racist. When we teach history, we want our kids to learn history. It's not just so they're not ignorant, but we don't want them to be ignorant so they don't repeat the mistakes of the past. So we can look toward the past and see how far we've come, how far we have progressed. But that doesn't appear to be your goal here, because you want everyone to realize how racist we are and that we haven't had a lot of progress because we haven't confronted the true evils of what has happened.
Critical race theory is basically teaching people to hate our country.
Schools are embracing this ideology, and
that's not propaganda. Like, if you're teaching that America is built upon racism, what other conclusion are you going to have if you're a good person? It's obvious. Someone edited this.
forcing white students and white teachers to be ashamed of their own skin color.
It's not critical race theory, it's racism.
These are systemic things. Ignoring it perpetuates the problem. By acknowledging it, we can find solutions. And
you really think there's a problem if you think like our Declaration of Independence, our Constitution, let's say, because all these things are racist, right? All these systems are racist. So we haven't seen the racism of it into the past, and it's created so many problems. So now we have to acknowledge that everything about it is racist, and only then we can find the solutions. And what is the solution? Because it doesn't sound like America being a better place or less racism will be the end goal of that. Convincing ourselves that everything is racist, everything was built on racism. What is the end goal of that? Because it doesn't sound like it's solving problems. As a matter of fact, that's the whole grift of the left is to not solve problems. Tammy Bruce, who's on Fox News, is a commentator. She has a show, I think, on the weekends or something. But she's a lesbian. She's a, I don't know if she still identifies as a feminist, but she was, a leftist. And she realized that when they get together to talk about stuff, it was never to solve problems. It was just to whine and complain about problems and then create more of them. I don't think you people want to solve problems. And that's pretty obvious when you're aware that critical race theory is connected to critical theory, which is a Marxist ideology. It's a Marxist theory. So the goal is to tear down these institutions, because you can't start completing, which leads to socialism and communism and all these other things that are destructive, unless you tear down the things that are stopping that from happening, like freedom and liberty, the things that are in our Constitution. Okay.
We can address the problems and the inequality that exists in our country. And so I think teaching it this way actually does the opposite of what these people say it does.
I'm so not even in far, but what inequalities are you talking about? Like, because you can look at things that are disproportionate, sure, but that does not mean that the root of it is always racism. It doesn't mean that. Like, people make individual choices, and sometimes they are bad choices. And sometimes a collective community makes a collective bad choice. And some of that, I don't know, some time ago, maybe you could have made the argument that it was residual effects of slavery and Jim Crow and so on. But there's so many people who can change their life for the better as capitalism, progresses throughout the world. It leads to, and technology advances. There's just so many different ways you can advance yourself. I mean, you can get famous for sprinkling salt on your food, for putting a man bun in the right way, for making a good song on TikTok. Critical race theory, not only does it teach white people to be insufferable jerks, but it also teaches people, black people, it infantilizes them to be perpetual victims. And that's really the frustrating thing about all this too. But let's go on.
Are you teaching children to hate America?
No, I'm teaching children to question America. And that's what makes a good patriot.
I don't think I don't think it's that we don't have critical race theory in schools. I think these people have already been indoctrinated and are already teaching these things. And that's why so many people with these ideology has kids, 18 to 24, not liking America. And there was a recent poll with that. The Daily Caller did a story about it because they've already been infected with this. So don't act like you're not teaching people to hate America. Like, what other rational conclusion would there be when you're like, everything is racist?
Don't force on our kids a particular worldview. Taking a white brush and painting this country as structurally racist, it's insane.
Why is it insane, though? I mean,
because it's a lie.
It is a lie.
Last year, Alana Fishbein says she received an email from her kids' school that students would be learning more about the role of race in American society. She thought the materials were racist, so she pulled her kids out of public school. Then she created an advocacy group, No Left Turn in Education, to draw attention to her claims that CRT is poisoning young minds.
This isn't distant history. In the 90s, the crime bill gave much more severe sentencing to crack cocaine versus powder cocaine simply because Black people were perceived as doing crack cocaine.
I wonder who she voted for. Was it Joe Biden? This leads me to a really good tweet that someone made. Because someone on Twitter who writes for the New York Times said there's been so many institutional things that have happened in America where it would be weird to argue that there weren't effects of racism or disparities or residual effects or whatever. And then Stephen Miller said, well, do you think that is your white 9-year-old's fault or your 9-year-old's fault? Or do you think it's like people who've been running Chicago for like 100 years? Because that's really where the insincerity of all this stuff is, because there are people who did deliberately racist things, made deliberately racist policies, who were deliberate racists, who we can point to. We can point to a party that did those things, and we can point to individuals who did those things, and we can hold them accountable. But the truth is that they don't want to hold those people accountable because they're like on the same side. And so when people bring up like, well, the crack cocaine in the bill, the crime bill, and it's like, who did you vote for, ma'am? Because I doubt it was for Donald Trump who decided to do the First Step Act. Another thing about the war on drugs is it's funny when you talk about it with people who are like older, maybe my dad's generation, who lived in communities where drugs were a really bad problem, because they'll be like, oh no, something needed to be done. And then if you talk to people in my oldest sister's like generation, they feel like, no, those people were like kidnapped. And so it's just really interesting. But there were Black legislators who got together in communities who wanted something done about the penalties of the different drug laws and stuff. And I don't know, like, did people not commit crimes? Did people not do things that were wrong? I mean, those are questions to ask too. Like, what is the argument, that you arrested too many Black people, or that white people should have been arrested more? I don't think it's about holding people accountable who actually did the wrongs. That's why they're always talking about systems, and they don't talk about individual responsibility, because the individuals or the parties that did these things, that implemented these policies, they're all on the same team. They fight for those guys, and those guys in power cover for these more radical guys. And it's like, no, why can't we point out that Democrats were the party of slavery? When we talk about people teaching inaccurate history, the party switch myth is extraordinarily inaccurate history.
And white people
Ask Joe Biden why he did that.
I think that's a great question. Wait, but this Joe Biden, I think, is a perfect illustration, right? Joe Biden would present himself as a nice guy who would never have a racist bone in his body, yet he participated in creating these laws that have a structural effect of affecting Black people more than white people.
But we don't have them now.
People affected by that law are still alive.
We're talking about something entirely different now. This is my taxpayers' money. I don't want it to go to indoctrinate kids that then are going to hate my kids because of the color of their skin.
Again, she's like, well, that'd be a good question to ask Joe Biden, but did you vote for him? Did you reward him? And Biden is not someone who has strong moral views. They were tough on crime because they were reading the room. And crime was bad, and crime is really bad now. I wonder how they're going to course correct that now. But this woman has a point. It is her taxpayer dollars. And we do vote for who passes curriculum and stuff. And these parents have a right to be concerned. These parents have a right to speak out.
And attack them because of the color of the skin. What happened in the summer, it twisted the minds of all kids. My kids can be attacked by Antifa kids or BLM kids that are not Black. They are white like my kids. But they are believing, they were indoctrinated and they internalized this philosophy.
Were your children beat up by Antifa kids?
I beg your pardon?
Were your children beat up by Antifa kids?
I'm talking, it's gonna happen if we're not gonna stop it.
So she's criticizing her what if scenario, which is funny because the entire Black Lives Matter narrative is just like false. Like the Black people are being hunted down by the police. Like data, there's no data to support that. Even like the example of the George Floyd thing, I already said race had no part of like the trial. No part of it was made up in your mind, fantasy. Didn't exist, no evidence. And you can say, no, it's inherent. Like, you say that because you're biased. You say that because you're racist. You say that because you're prejudiced against cops. You're prejudiced against Chauvin. And you know what? Maybe you feel he got what he deserved, but it's obvious he didn't get a fair trial. I mean, they shouldn't have had it in the city that they had it at. People were out. The jury wasn't sequestered, so they could see everything that came on TV. Even if they decided not to watch the news, there was some powerful propaganda that was on TV. People were constantly talking about it. Politicians were weighing in on it. Obviously, if the wrong conviction happened, that city was going to burn. People were concerned. People knew how many police were being staffed and so on. Like, they knew it was going to be bad. People were bracing. People were preparing to loot and whatever. Then you have activists encouraging people to get on juries like that so they can sway decisions. Like, we're at a really wacky place.
But we are going to stop it. We are the great majority of this country.
Anti-CRT propaganda is drawing big crowds.
Of course. And by the way, it's not so crazy that people could have anti-white propaganda because, I mean, Irish were treated really bad in this country. Italians were treated really bad in this country when they came here. People make up their minds and they attack people for all kinds of different reasons. So to act like teaching that everyone is racist and white people are inherently racist and they have a collective white identity and a worldview and so on, and assuming that people aren't, that's not going to create some kind of animosity, that's just stupid.
I'm against critical race theory.
More than 100 people showed up at this diner near Baltimore, where local Republican groups held a panel on school COVID shutdowns and CRT.
What is critical race theory?
Critical race theory is the idea that's taught to our nation's youth that the way that you're born contributes to the amount of success that you can achieve in this country. It basically states that white people are born with everything, and if you're not white, you're born with nothing.
Can you name any critical race theory scholars?
Probably not.
Can you name any critical race theory concepts?
I don't know what the concepts are. I think I summarized critical race theory as a whole pretty well.
To paint.
Okay, so that worldview and that mindset, though, that he said is kind of baked into the different tenets of critical race theory, though. Do these people just know talking points, and should they be more educated on what it is? Sure, but are we going to pretend that it doesn't? Like, what do you think? White fragility, books like that, like. If you promote this idea that there's white privilege, that there's racism all around us, there's this inherent racism, so much so that you can't really do anything too much about it, right? But white people are privileged and they have a more likely chance to succeed because the world is just kind of made for them, right? It kind of gives you Black people an excuse to fail. It decentivizes them to succeed. So it does teach white people to be insufferable oppressors and Black people to be losers.
The country as a inherently racist country from its founding, I think is dangerous.
The Three-Fifths Compromise is written into the Constitution, in which slaves are counted as 3/5 of a person.
Of course, and that was applied at an earlier time. That is not the case now, obviously.
Here's where they don't want to teach the nuance of history of why was there the Three-Fifths Compromise? Because the slave states, the southern states, they wanted more of a population boost. And they wanted to count the bodies, but they didn't want Black people to actually have the vote, right? The other states, the northern states, was we cannot allow these people to have that much control. So they did write in the Three-Fifths Compromise. It's not because the people in the north agreed that Black people were 3/5 of a person. They did that to stop racist from taking more power.
You just mentioned the founding of the country, so.
Well, yeah, it wasn't perfectly written in the Constitution.
When did you first hear about critical race theory?
Sometime around last year.
Where'd you see it?
On Fox News. The idea that you can succeed based on your race is ludicrous. This is not the 1960s anymore. Just because of your skin color does not mean that you cannot be successful here in America. Point blank, period.
I teach these books for my anthropology class.
Notice how she didn't challenge her. She's like, oh, she's found us out. So they didn't even challenge the black lady. Okay.
Are you teaching white kids to hate themselves for being white?
No.
Yes, you are.
Are you teaching black kids that there's nothing they can do to improve their situation?
Absolutely not.
But you're making excuses for why they can't succeed, and that someone else will always have a leg up on them, though. And that it's so necessary that we have to look at all these other institutions and acknowledge these things before we can fix the problems, when that's just not true. I mean, people were killing it. As soon as slavery was over, people were like, I'm going to go make something of myself. And you give these kids a chip on their shoulder, and it's 2021. Okay.
There's racism, and they can never fight it, so they should give up.
Absolutely not. I'm creating little...
Why would she admit to that? Because these people are grifting off of racism. So you can totally make something of yourself. Look at Patrisse Cullors, co-founder of Black Lives Matter, who is a trained Marxist, by the way, pushing all this racist ideology of the world, capitalizing off the deaths of black people. And now she got herself some fancy homes in white communities. So yes, you can make something of yourself, especially if you embrace racism.
Free thinkers and future politicians and lawyers and teachers and change makers.
You really think you're creating free thinkers by teaching people through your worldview of how to think? In like high school, where you teach, where kids are way more shy about expressing their thoughts and their ideas. I love that CNN did this, by the way. And I saw some people like, I hope they keep this up. I hope they keep this up, where they're just like mocking all of these parents who are so concerned about how their tax dollars are being spent, where their kids are going to school, and what they're being taught, and how all these kids now, they hate their country, and how they don't want their kids to hate the country and be indoctrinated with all of this ideology. And they're just painting it like, oh, these politicians are crazy. These Republicans are crazy. Fox News is crazy. Everyone's crazy except the people who are pushing that everything is racist. I hope they do this. This is a banging strategy for them. Of course, I'm being sarcastic, and we're just going to mop the floor with them if they keep this nonsense up.
Our kids are smart. They know what's happening. And
what's happening? What's happening? Because I talked about the George Floyd thing, and everyone was like, saying all of this racial stuff, and that, like I said, there was no evidence enough to present it in court. They don't know what's happening. As a matter of fact, Skeptic Magazine, you did a poll, survey, whatever, and they asked people about gun statistics, or like people who got shot and killed by the police, unarmed black men, and the more liberal you are, the more wrong you were about the actual data. There are people who believe more than 10,000 unarmed black people were killed by police. Or 10,000 or hundreds. The number is like, 9 or 13 or something ridiculous like that. It's really, really low. At least in like 2019. And even 2020, it was still like low. But people are going around burning down communities, which I don't know how that helped anyone. These kids are smart. Have you been on TikTok? Kids are not smart. They're not. They have such awful opinions. And not all of them, but at 18, like, did I have it all together? No, but I was smarter than these kids right now that I see on TikTok with like hundreds of thousands of followers who say the dumbest, craziest things. Kids are not smart. They do not know what's up. And if their professor tells them something, they will be like, well, my professor told me this. Your professor is wrong. But that's someone that they trust and they look up to. And they told them something, and they don't believe that this person is going to deliberately mislead them. is where they go with. So if your teacher tells them something and you're teaching them through this specific worldview that America is racist and it has all of these racist institutions, like the 3/5 thing, if you just look at that face value, that is terrible. That is awful. It's so awful. But they don't want to teach that Democrats, party of slavery, Jim Crow, fought against the civil rights. They eventually had a change of heart, but that was because they knew strategically where the country was going, and it was better to jump ahead of the curve so they could captivate the black vote for the rest of forever. But they want to teach it the party switch. Okay.
I think we do them a disservice by continuing to pretend like critical race theory is the issue when it's really you just don't want kids to learn the truth. Because not only do they become critical thinkers, they also become voters. And that is what's scaring a lot of these people, because they know that as this generation gets older, a lot of these people that are making these laws will be voted out of office.
Oh, they just told you what the game is. They're afraid that we're going to indoctrinate these voters, and that's why they want to stop us. But we can see what you're doing, that you want to indoctrinate these people so they will vote for people with this racist ideology, people who do subscribe to a Marxist worldview. That's funny. How come CNN didn't mention that? Because it's very obvious to find out. Very simple. You Google it in 5 minutes and find out. Very interesting.
All these opponents of critical race theory told us that, sure, racism was a problem in the past, but it's not now. And so we got into these long conversations about when exactly they thought racism had ended in America. And they didn't have a good answer.
What did they tell you? What were their answers for that? Did they point to any specific?
I don't think racism is over in America, because I think the CNN reporter that she's talking to is a racist. And I think maybe they'll admit their collective white guilt sort of thing, but if they have to face their own racism, they would be like everyone else. How dare you think that? I'm not a racist. But she's done some very racist things on her network, on her platform. I don't know a single person who would say that there's no racism in America. Is it a major problem that it will detain you from achieving any sort of life goal if you put your mind to? Absolutely not. Is it a major factor in America? No. They're trying to make it so. They're doing their darndest to make it so. And that's what we're pushing back against. It's a problem of the heart. It's a problem, especially as a Christian. I don't like that people would hate each other over something so stupid. It's so stupid. But there are stupid, lazy people who will always look for an excuse to hate someone. That's the thing. They want to look for an excuse to hate someone, and they want to look for an excuse that they can't succeed in life. And it's not just racism that people will blame these things on. Sexism too. I've heard so many women who are insufferable, truly insufferable, and they'll complain about how they didn't get promoted at their job and blah, 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 and they'll blame sexism. And it's possible that could be the case, but some of the scenarios they explain are just dude, it wasn't sexism. But they'll have those excuses that it was the patriarchy holding them down, when the truth is that no one likes you. You're not a good person. But it's easy to blame these things, and it's easy to blame systems when it comes to racism, all this other stuff, to explain why you can't succeed or why other people are holding you down. And when people talk about collective white guilt, that's another thing too, so they don't have to talk about themselves and their own problems. Well, if you admit to being a racist, sweetheart, then you need to deal with that, and you're not a good person. But I don't know if she would, Brianna here, I know she's playing her propaganda game, but I've seen her do racist things on her network. I believe she's a racist, and she's part of the problem. I'm not going to say there's not a racism problem in America. It's not a major problem in America, but she is a major problem in America, at least on CNN. At least on CNN is a major problem in America. Actually, it's not just America. It's worldwide, because my sister went to Mexico, and they believe all kinds of crazy things, all sort of crazy things. But I wouldn't dare say that racism doesn't exist and there aren't problems, because she's a problem.
Specific data points?
Well, one person offered the 90s. Another person said, well, the 50s and 60s were really bad, but that ended sometime in the 80s and 90s. Other people pointed to Barack Obama.
A lot of people did feel like when Barack Obama, actually, some people were like, we're going to end racism, vote for Obama. They've reached the end of the rainbow. This is the finish line. We're going to elect a black president. Everyone can know that you could do anything in America. But then like racism, like just exacerbated. Like some people roll their eyes and are like, Obama like worsened racial divisions, but it's true. Like through this whole era and the rise of Black Lives Matter, the politicization of it, the fact that you could not criticize Obama without someone calling you a racist when the truth is he's just a bad president that did bad things. And he did more bad things than just wearing a tan suit. But racism is a crutch, and a lot of people don't want to let that go. So that was the video. That was a crazy video. Just some huge propaganda on CNN's part. I loved it. I loved it because someone edited that and thought this will be great. We're gonna make all these parents look dumb. I still love that they didn't show challenging the black woman. I love that. I mean, I guess they felt that the teacher that they talked to could handle some of those criticisms. But it's still not the same. So what I will challenge Republicans with is to do some more reading, do some more research on it, to look at the tenets of it. And it is like surrounded with some philosophical gobbledygook. But it's easy to break down. There's some people who break it down well, I guess I could say rather. Critical race theory stems from critical theory, which is a Marxist theory. And the truth of the matter is that there's a lot of people who do not like America, who want to fundamentally change it. And so it's cultural Marxism. And they're using race to push Marxism. And that is not a right-wing talking point. Like I said, you can find this out in like 5 minutes of Google searching. And it's really interesting that they didn't ask that teacher about it. It's really interesting that they didn't air anything about it, because I am so sure that she probably interviewed a Republican that said it's a Marxist ideology. Keep painting parents who are concerned about their children in a negative light. But people had to live through last year when everyone had to apologize for being white, and white people had to confess their guilt and do all this kind of stuff. And sometimes people didn't say anything publicly, but oh man, I got messages from people asking me my 2 cents, and I gave them my 2 cents about how garbage it was. People are concerned about their future. They didn't just forget how you try to just call them all racist. They didn't forget how you treated them. It's not just a theory that's being taught. It's a philosophy and a worldview that's been applied. And that's really what the problem is. And it's unfortunate that people haven't woken up to it earlier, but they are awake now, and they're fighting back, and they're going to continue fighting. And I will continue fighting against the racist propaganda of CNN and Breonna Keller. So thank you guys for watching. Please visit blacktnews.com. Check out content that I've written. Check out my store. Check out different products that I have. And if you are interested in supporting Black Tea News, which I am asking that you do that, you can go to blacktnews.com/donate. And thank you guys so much for being part of the conversation. This is something we're going to keep fighting on all the time. And thank you, CNN, for the content. And I'm sure we'll be back.